One of the best things about special features on DVDs and Blu-rays is the litany of deleted scenes. But sometimes, omitting those scenes creates pesky plot holes that would have been sealed if only they had just stayed in place. Here are some deleted scenes that would have fixed some of cinema's most pesky and confusing plot points. Aliens. Aliens is one of the best movies ever made, but it does have one weird issue. It seems like Ripley is barely affected by anything. She goes through the whole movie showing about two emotions: kill and kill with fire. But that's a little weird, right? After all, she comes back after 100 years of sleep, her whole family and life have passed away, and she basically shrugs it all off. It just seems like she's being a little too cavalier about it all. But that wouldn't be the case if this deleted scene was left in. We see here that her daughter's death of old age really did have a profound effect on her. In addition to making Ripley not seem like, a robot, it also makes her bond with Newt at the end of the movie make a ton more sense. She's trying to replace the daughter-sized hole in her heart. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. If you've only ever seen the two Deathly Hallows films and never read the books, you probably think it's weird that the Death Eaters managed to always find Ron, Harry, and Hermione. Were they wearing some kind of tracking beacon? Did they forget to turn the GPS on their wands off? What the heck? Well, the actual reason is simple. Voldemort put a curse on his own name so that whenever anyone says it, he and the Death Eaters can detect them and find them. Which isn't a problem for most people because they all call him you-know-who. But then there's Harry, who refuses to. So every time he says Voldemort's name in an attempt to puff up his chest and say, "I'm not scared of him," he's actually shining a huge spotlight for all the guys who want to kill him. Of course, eventually he learns better, because Ron tells him.
That's how they track people now.
How do you know that?
Overheard some bloke at the ministry talking about it.
But the filmmakers deleted that scene, so it suddenly goes from Death Eaters knowing where Harry and the gang are 24/7 to them never knowing. It's not the worst plot hole in the whole series, but that scene probably could have cleared up a whole lot of confusion. The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is one of the best trilogies ever, but there's always been one weird part in it: Boromir. He alternates between heroism and villainy seemingly at random. It all comes to a head when Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo at Amon Hen. Most of us assume that the ring's influence corrupted Boromir, but there's a much sadder explanation, as revealed in one of the deleted scenes that made its way into the extended editions. As we know from Return of the King, Boromir's father, Denethor, is a cruel, unforgiving man. He's the guy who sends Boromir to the council to claim the one ring to bring glory to Gondor.
You must go. Bring me back this mighty gift.
So when Boromir seems lustful over the ring, he's really just trying to be a good son to please his overbearing prick of a father.
I trust this mission only to your brother, the one who will not fail me.
Guy's a total buttface. This also means his dad has been one of the most destructive forces in the entire saga since the first movie. Seriously, this guy is worse than Saruman. Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day easily ranks up there with Bill Murray's best films. Murray's character relives one day in his life for seemingly no purpose over and over.
Then put your little hand in mine. There ain't no hill or mountain.
Due to the lack of explanation in the finished film, people have argued for years about just what the heck the point of it all is. And while some might argue that it's actually one of the movie's high points, that doesn't make the explanation's absence any less confusing. What's making Murray so death-proof?
He might be okay.
While still in development, the filmmakers had a simple and kinda dumb explanation in mind. An ex of Murray's character cursed him until he could learn how to actually love, at which point the curse would end. Fortunately, this scene was cut before it was even filmed, because honestly, a clear-cut explanation like that would have just taken away from what makes the movie so great in the first place.
Phil? Hey, Phil Connors!
Ned?
Star Trek. If you don't remember who Nero is, we'll catch you up. He's the Romulan bald bad guy in J.J. Abrams' 2009 reboot of Star Trek, who screams, "Fire everything!" He's also the one who kills Captain Kirk's dad Thor while Kirk is too busy being born to save him. But after the opening scene, Nero just conveniently disappears until Kirk's all grown up. What was he doing? Taking a vacation? Actually, he was being held prisoner off in deleted scenes land. The film needed about 20 years to pass so that Nero could face off against an adult Captain Kirk, so J.J. Abrams and company had to give him something to do in the meantime. Their idea was that Nero was captured by Klingons and held prisoner for years until he could finally break free. Listen to the voice of everybody's favorite Star Trek character, Exposition Man.
It's been more than 20 years, Nero, since we captured your ship.
The filmmakers ultimately cut this scene out of the movie, leaving a big, gaping question mark in the plot that no amount of lens flares could cover up. Return of the Jedi. One of the biggest questions in Return of the Jedi has annoyed fans for years. Why didn't Obi-Wan just tell Luke that Darth Vader was his father in the first place? He started out as a pretty cool old guy, showing him fancy laser swords in his creepy desert hut. But then he straight up lied to Luke about who his father really was. Well, guess what? Turns out it wasn't Obi-Wan's fault. It was Yoda who confessed the truth on his deathbed. Here's how the final cut of that scene went.
Not ready for the burger for you.
I'm sorry.
But the original version had an extra line that took all the blame off Obi-Wan.
Not ready for the burden, were you? Obi-Wan would have told you long ago had I let him.
Yoda purposefully kept the secret from Luke, even forbidding Obi-Wan from telling Luke out of fear what Luke would do if he knew the truth. And while we're on the subject of confusing Jedi dad issues, this one's a doozy. Revenge of the Sith. In The Phantom Menace, we find out that Anakin has no father, but that's a little silly. Even Jesus had a dad. So who was Anakin's? The Phantom Menace never tells us, but a deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith reveals the truth. The scene, which George Lucas outlined but never filmed, explains that Palpatine's master taught him how to manipulate midichlorians to create life. In an attempt to create the perfect pupil, Palpatine created Anakin, saying that from a certain point of view, he was Anakin's father. The scene was in script phase when Lucas cut it, but it adds extra weight to Return of the Jedi. Anakin, as Darth Vader, tries to draw his son to the dark side, just like his own father did. It's a cool backstory, but it still wouldn't have made Revenge of the Sith suck any less. Independence Day. Remember Independence Day? Of course you do! It's a great, silly movie about humanity fighting against aliens and defeating them with the combined powers of inspirational public speaking and also hacking? Hold up. How exactly did Jeff Goldblum get a computer virus onto the alien ship? It's hard enough getting a PC to play nice with a Mac. Well, you guessed it, a deleted scene has the answer. Remember how Goldblum found out when the aliens were going to attack by decoding messages they were sending through Earth's satellites? He used that information like a Rosetta Stone to figure out the computers on the crashed alien ship at Roswell.
See these patterns here, they're repeating sequentially, just like their countdown signal. They're using that frequency for computer communications. Huh? See? That's how they're coordinating their ships.
From there, he figured out how to write a virus specifically for the aliens' computers, which still doesn't make a bunch of sense, but it's a step up from magical hacking. So, take that, aliens.
Welcome to Earth.
The Goonies. Remember at the end of The Goonies when the kids are screaming at their parents about all their adventures? Out of the blue, Data starts talking about an octopus.
What happened out there where your life's in danger?
The octopus was fully scary. Oh,
And no, you didn't forget about the epic scene where the Goonies fight an octopus, because it was taken out of the final cut. But the scene did survive. When the Goonies are swimming through the lake to the pirate ship, they run into a giant octopus that tries to eat them all. Because what's more piratey than an octopus-infested lake? Nothing, that's what. So get your truffle shuffle on, because this mystery is solved.
The Star Wars universe is a rich tapestry, but there are times when it could have been even richer. From deleted subplots to abandoned action sequences, these are the Star Wars deleted scenes that could have had a big impact on the franchise. In A New Hope, we meet Luke Skywalker when he and his uncle Owen purchase C-3PO and R2-D2 from a group of Jawas. It's a fine introduction, and it allows the narrative spine of the film to carry through the two droids. However, deleted scenes from the film reveal that we were originally going to get to know Luke in a different way. George Lucas shot several minutes of scenes on Tatooine that were later cut from the film, which would have shown Luke doing much more than farming. In the scene, Luke sees the space battle that opens the film through binoculars and goes to show his friends what he'd seen. These scenes also introduced Luke's friend, Biggs Darklighter.
Oh, Biggs is right. I'm never gonna get out of here.
During their brief interaction, Biggs explains his plans to sneak away and join the Rebel Alliance. While the scenes would have slowed down the film a little if they'd stayed in, they would have also added a large amount of world building and helped explain some of Luke's whinier tendencies. The Empire Strikes Back features a famous moment in which Leia plants a big kiss on Luke Skywalker to make Han Solo jealous.
Take it easy.
It works, but the moment is later undercut by the revelation that Luke and Leia are brother and sister. As it turns out, things could have been much more awkward. A deleted portion of the kissing scene takes place before Han enters the room, as Luke and Leia talk alone about his recovery. With his near-death experience on his mind, Luke begins to tell Leia how he feels about her. They almost share a more intimate kiss, but they're interrupted by C-3PO, because that's just what 3PO was born to do. The sequence would have also featured Luke revealing his plan to go to Dagobah to Leia, adding even more color to his inner life. Greedo was first introduced in what has become one of the most infamous scenes in Star Wars history, as a bounty hunter confronting Han Solo. But Greedo has a history. In The Phantom Menace, one of Anakin Skywalker's friends turns out to be a younger version of Greedo. In a deleted scene, we see that the kid was nasty from the start. George Lucas shot a lot of additional footage for Phantom Menace's pod race sequence, including more of the race itself and another scene set right after the race. The deleted scene shows Anakin and Greedo getting into a fight because Greedo accused Anakin of cheating. Their fight is broken up by Qui-Gon, who tries to explain to Anakin that he doesn't need to argue if he knows the truth himself. The scene underlines the anger within Anakin, and also lets us know that Greedo has always been a jerk. For much of Attack of the Clones, Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala are on her home planet of Naboo. They're supposed to be there for security reasons, but all that time alone together creates a romance. Deleted scenes from the film reveal that the Naboo trip included an extended sequence in which Padme discusses her political career. There's also an even longer scene in which Anakin meets Padme's parents. The sequence may have slowed the final film down a bit, but it adds a lot of depth to Padme. We learn that she wasn't raised as royalty, she loves quiet family life, and she's passionate about helping around the galaxy. We also see Anakin get grumpy when she tells her parents that he's not her boyfriend. One of the best things about the prequels is seeing the Jedi Order during their greatest days. That meant we got to see lots of Jedi beyond the few we'd met already. Sadly, the films have to cover so much ground that we don't get a chance to get to know most of these other Jedi. They're mostly supporting characters who barely get a word in. A deleted scene from the final battle in Attack of the Clones gave some of those supporting Jedi more to do. The missing scene is an action sequence in which Jedi Masters Ki-Adi-Mundi and Plo Koon stage a raid on a droid control ship. The scene was never finished, but at least we got the Clone Wars. There's a lot going on in Revenge of the Sith. That means several deleted scenes fell by the wayside, and some of them follow the rise of what would become the Rebel Alliance. These deleted scenes paint a clear picture of a small group of worried senators discussing how to make a move against Palpatine. The stronger Palpatine gets, the closer they get to rebellion. It's an intriguing subplot, and would have added quite a bit more context for the future of the rebellion if it stayed in the final film. The Force Awakens has to carry on a story that ended on the big screen more than 30 years earlier, and set up a new story with a new cast of characters. That's a lot of ground to cover, and that means some aspects of the world building are left to the imagination. One of these has to do with the Resistance, the Republic, and how General Leia Organa factors into both. Leia played a key role in the formation of the New Republic, but when the First Order rose, many people in the Republic leadership wouldn't believe her when she said it was a major threat to their future. So Leia founded the Resistance, determined to stop the First Order before they destroyed the Republic. In a deleted scene from The Force Awakens, this is given a touch more detail, as Leia sends Resistance member Corsella to ask the Republic for help. Sadly, the scene was cut, and we only see Corsella in one shot, just before her death as the First Order destroys the Republic. The Last Jedi is the second film in the sequel trilogy, but the first in that trilogy to really deal with Luke Skywalker in a major way. Director Rian Johnson had to not just introduce this new version of Luke, but also explain the complex emotions that led him to abandon his friends and the Force. It's one of the most important parts of the movie, but some things still had to be cut. One of the most powerful Last Jedi deleted scenes comes shortly after Luke figures out Han is dead. We don't get to see Rey and Chewie tell him that his brother-in-law and friend is dead, but one deleted scene shows us the aftermath. Silent and shaken, Luke sits down in his hut and tries to deal with the loss of Han. You can see the despair on his face, along with the guilt, as he wonders if things might have been different if he'd stayed. It's a wonderful performance from Mark Hamill, but it wound up on the cutting room floor.
While it's really easy to be upset when directors chop cool-sounding scenes out of our favorite movies, the reality is that deleted scenes are a necessity. But every once in a while, a deleted scene is uncovered that completely alters our perception of a film. In fact, it could be argued that some of the most legendary scenes to ever hit the cutting room floor would have actually improved the films they were removed from. Join us as we uncover the very best deleted scenes that deserve to be pulled out of the trash and given their own time to shine in the spotlight. Aliens. After surviving the events of Alien, Ellen Ripley wakes up in the sequel to discover that she spent 57 years traveling in hypersleep. Audiences who saw the original theatrical cut of Aliens assume that Ripley shrugs this ordeal off for the most part. But a deleted scene that ended up in the 1992 special edition reveals how the psychological impact of this experience hurt our heroine far more than anyone ever realized. Following her awakening, Ripley meets company rep Carter Burke and asks about her daughter, insisting on answers. After some hesitation, Burke reluctantly reveals that her daughter died 2 years earlier at the age of 66. Upon seeing a photograph of Amanda Ripley aged beyond recognition, Sigourney Weaver's heroine is overcome with shock and grief.
I promised her that I would be home for her birthday. Her 11th birthday.
In hindsight, it's hard to understand why director James Cameron chose to remove this scene in the first place. Not only does the loss of Ripley's daughter help contextualize the subsequent bond that she forms with Newt, but it also serves as a stunning showcase of Weaver's acting ability. X-Men First Class. In 2011, X-Men First Class rebooted the mutant franchise, in the process revealing how the central relationship between Charles Xavier and Eric Lehnsherr came to be. With that in mind, it made perfect sense to see these two bitter rivals initially become friends. However, we didn't expect to see Xavier telepathically alter the perceptions of a potential new student to convince her that Magneto was dressed in women's clothing.
It's good, isn't it? What?
How did you do that?
That's right. The Blu-ray edition of First Class revealed a deleted scene in which Michael Fassbender actually wore a wig and dressed in drag while recruiting new students. Unfortunately, this hilarious moment never made it to cinemas, but now that it's come to light, it's easy to see why Magneto eventually turned against his old friend. Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Here's another example of James Cameron dropping the ball on one of his most popular movies. In Terminator 2: Judgment Day, John Connor asks the Terminator about his mechanical mind and discovers that his newfound protector can learn human behavior after being exposed to it for prolonged periods of time. However, a deleted scene found on the special edition of T2 reveals that Skynet limited the Terminator's processors to a read-only function by default, preventing it from actually understanding human behavior on a personal level. Cue a visually stunning scene during which John and his mother open up the Terminator's skull to manually alter his CPU.
Was there a problem?
No problem. None whatsoever.
The deleted scene serves as yet another reminder of how groundbreaking the visual effects were in T2. But more importantly, the ramifications of what happened here pay off later in the movie as the Terminator displays empathy in the final scene. Mean Girls. One of the defining moments of the classic 2014 comedy Mean Girls is when Katie breaks her crown at the end and throws out the pieces to the other girls who deserve the title of Spring Fling Queen, including frenemy Regina George. At the time, audiences assumed Katie and Regina hadn't yet made up following the fight that culminated in that brutal bus ordeal. But a deleted scene reveals that the pair did actually speak before the prom.
Stop trying to make this about you. I'm the one that got hit by the bus.
Well, I'm sorry about all the other stuff, too.
Okay. I'm going to forgive you.
Sure, Regina is on pain medication in this moment, but it actually goes a long way to help humanize her and also further explains Katie's subsequent act of kindness. It's a shame that audiences didn't see this conversation play out in theaters, but Mean Girls remains totally fetch nonetheless.
Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Blade Runner. The question of whether Rick Deckard is a replicant has plagued film lovers for decades. However, Blade Runner director Ridley Scott insists that Deckard is an artificial being, and he included a scene that arguably proves this in his official director's cut. In typical puzzling fashion, the original cut of Blade Runner includes a scene in which Deckard finds an origami unicorn during his escape with Rachel. All audiences know at this stage is that a fellow Blade Runner named Gaff left this behind for Deckard, but the reason why is unclear. However, in a deleted scene that Scott included in later versions, Deckard dreams of a unicorn. The suggestion here is that Gaff left this origami for him because he knows Deckard's memories and innermost thoughts. How would he know this? Because Deckard is a replicant, and these memories were implants. The Thing. John Carpenter's sci-fi horror classic The Thing has inspired debates surrounding its protagonist and whether he can be trusted by the film's end. The Antarctic base where pilot R.J. MacReady has been sent is occupied by a shape-shifting alien that impersonates the people it kills. In the final scene, MacReady and fellow survivor Childs are the only two who remain, leaving audiences to guess whether one of them is secretly the monster in disguise.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
In an alternate ending, it's revealed that the alien does in fact survive, escaping the Antarctic base in the form of a husky. This deleted scene strongly suggests that MacReady definitely did die, no matter who the monster was impersonating. However, this still doesn't explain which survivor held a deadly secret at the end of the original theatrical cut. But some eagle-eyed fans noticed that Childs doesn't appear to be breathing in that last scene, whereas MacReady's icy breath can be seen in the air, suggesting that Childs isn't really human after all. Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. With director Zack Snyder trying to turn the DCEU into a viable cinematic universe, a lot of Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice felt rushed. At times, characters even seemed to possess knowledge that should have been out of their reach. The most obvious example occurs toward the end, when an imprisoned Lex Luthor alludes to an evil force that threatens to destroy the Earth.
The bell's already been rung, and they've heard it.
Comic book fans assumed that this ominous warning was linked to Darkseid in some way. And they were right, as his nephew Steppenwolf arrived soon after to cause havoc for our heroes in Justice League. But how did Superman's arch-nemesis know Steppenwolf would travel to Earth in the first place? In the Ultimate Edition of Dawn of Justice, a deleted scene set on the Kryptonian ship Luthor captured reveals that the megalomaniac experienced direct contact with Steppenwolf. Sure, the character design changed dramatically between films, but at least we finally know the truth about what Luthor was talking about while trapped in his cell.
I believe in truth, but I'm also a big fan of justice.
Star Wars Episode VI: Return of the Jedi. For decades, audiences have argued over the existence of numerous plot holes in the Star Wars franchise. The one that arguably sticks out the most is why Luke Skywalker was never told the true identity of his father. Sure, this omission built impressive amounts of tension between Skywalker and Darth Vader, but one has to question why Obi-Wan Kenobi didn't tell him long before the pair finally clashed in battle. Well, it turns out that Return of the Jedi originally included another line that explains exactly why Kenobi originally withheld this vital information, and it's all because of Yoda. When Luke returns to Yoda's bedside one last time, the fuzzy green Jedi reveals that he forbade Kenobi from telling him the truth about Vader.
Not ready for the burden, were you? Obi-Wan would have told you long ago had I let him.
Not only does this deleted scene solve one of the most troubling plot holes in the franchise, it also sheds new light on Kenobi's relationship with Yoda and their power dynamic. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. Long before Voldemort reemerged to cause havoc in Harry Potter's life, the young wizard had to deal with an evil far closer to home, his abusive aunt, uncle, and cousin who adopted him following his parents' deaths. It's easy to picture these characters purely in terms of light and darkness, but a deleted scene removed from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 reminds us that everyone contains elements of both, including Harry's rude cousin Dudley Dursley.
I don't think you're a waste of space.
Thanks.
While it's unfortunate that this parting was cut, it's still heartening that fans eventually got to see this important moment play out in live action.
Game of Thrones has always been a pretty sprawling TV show, and plenty of material has ended up on the cutting room floor. But though these scenes were deleted, they're still fascinating to explore, especially since these moments could have subtly changed the course of the story, or at least our perception of events. Let's explore some of the more substantial moments that never made the final cut. The execution of Littlefinger was one of the most shocking moments in the Season 7 finale, but how did Sansa and Arya Stark come to learn about his whole lifetime of crimes? In an interview with Variety, actor Isaac Hempstead Wright, who portrays Bran Stark, revealed that he shot a deleted sequence with Sophie Turner, who portrays Sansa. In the scene, Sansa reportedly consulted with Bran just ahead of Littlefinger's trial. As you may recall, Sansa was convinced her sister Arya was out to assassinate her in order to become the Lady of Winterfell. Arya suspected the same of Sansa, and it was all thanks to that master manipulator, Littlefinger. Viewers were sweating buckets watching the Season 7 finale, since it looked like one of the Stark sisters might kill the other. But then Sansa and Arya flipped the script. sentencing Littlefinger to death, revealing their feud to be an elaborate ruse.
Thank you for all your many lessons, Lord Baelish. I will never forget them.
It was a big twist, but it seemed to leave a bit of a plot hole behind too. How were the Stark children suddenly so certain of Littlefinger's history of manipulation and betrayal? According to Hempstead Wright, a deleted scene from the episode would have cleared up any ambiguity. It revealed exactly how the Stark sisters learned of Littlefinger's schemes, and it would have let audiences see how Sansa and Arya arrived at the decision to execute him. In the deleted scene, Bran uses his newfound abilities as a three-eyed raven to peer into Littlefinger's past, unearthing every underhanded thing he'd ever done in his quest for power. Hempstead Wright told Variety, "The story was that it suddenly occurred to Sansa that she had a huge CCTV department at her discretion, and it might be a good idea to check with Bran first before she guts her own sister." Though audiences can kind of still fill in the blanks without the scene, its inclusion would have threaded the plot together with a little more clarity. It also would have shed more light on Bran's immense powers, giving us a much stronger impression of how extraordinary his gifts really are. Bran's ability to access the history of man and the secrets of Westeros is an astonishing skill, and a potentially powerful weapon. As was made clear in Season 8, Bran's knowledge that Jon is the rightful heir to the Seven Kingdoms sparked an unfortunate chain of events, one that's played an important part in Daenerys Targaryen's descent into madness. Sansa has undergone a remarkable transformation since we first met the dreamy young girl looking forward to marriage, and one person who's had a major hand in her development is Sandor Clegane, otherwise known as the Hound. Throughout much of Game of Thrones, he seemed ultimately drawn to and repulsed by Sansa's innocence, frequently calling her Little Bird with a mixture of sweetness and condescension.
No, Little Bird, I won't hurt you.
Of course, the Hound uses that nickname again in the 4th episode of Season 8, when the dynamics between the two are remarkably different. It's a scene that highlights just how much Sansa has grown throughout the course of Game of Thrones.
You've changed, Little Bird.
Yet one deleted scene all the way back in Season 2 depicts a Sansa who's already prepared to stand up to the Hound.
Sing.
I don't know any songs. Not anymore.
Instead of a quivering waif, we see a young woman who's perfectly willing to stand her ground. And perhaps that was the problem. The scene of her standing up for herself, even a little bit, could have been seen as too much too soon, as far as Sansa's development is concerned. Sansa and the Hound's Season 8 reunion certainly wouldn't have been half as bittersweet if she'd already demonstrated the potential for such strength way back in Season 2. Tormund has always been right at the center of the tension between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings. He's helpful to the Night's Watch, but he's not sentimental about their history. He's committed to being part of the Free Folk, but he's also Jon Snow's friend. When Jon was the commander of the Night's Watch, he welcomed Tormund and other Wildlings across the wall. That brought the tension to its boiling point, resulting in the slaying of Jon Snow. In a deleted scene from Season 5 that would have taken place before Jon's death and resurrection, Sir Alistair Thorne, one of Snow's eventual killers, verbally spars with Tormund. He lets Tormund know just how much he distrusts him and how little he likes housing him. Tormund gruffly replies,
"You must no longer be in charge then."
It's a moment of intense foreshadowing, but had the scene been included in the show, it might have made Tormund seem partially responsible for Jon Snow's murder, however involuntarily. Though he didn't wield a dagger, his aggressive needling of Alistair might have been perceived as the straw that broke the camel's back. Audiences might have blamed Tormund for Sir Alistair's subsequent actions. Though the scene is appropriate for that era of the show, it may well have cast a pall over an alliance that has since helped shape the future of Westeros. Game of Thrones mines conflict from absolutely every angle. Life against death, woman against man, religion against cynicism. Another major clash? The ongoing animosity between the nobility and common folk of Westeros. The prostitute Shae had a pretty long run on Game of Thrones, but her luck eventually ran out. First there was her damaging testimony against Tyrion Lannister, who then tragically killed her when he encountered her in his father's bed. It was tragic and it was extreme, but a deleted scene between Shae and Bronn reveals a far more tender side to the conflict, and it might change how you view Shae's actions. In the scene, Bronn commiserates with Shae as a fellow commoner.
These people, even the good ones, they use us as they please. And when we're no longer any use, they spit us out.
It's the kindest we've ever seen Bronn, and the moment emphasizes the difficult position that Shae was in.
We have to adapt to circumstances, is what I'm saying. Learn some new tricks.
With this scene in mind, what happens between Shae and Tyrion becomes even more complicated. Yes, she did something awful, but this scene dares to ask, what choice did she have? Grand Maester Pycelle was always a conniving man. Even when acting like a doddering old fool, he delighted in playing passive-aggressive games. and he never missed an opportunity to dismiss and disrespect Tyrion. But his detestable nature often went completely unnoticed by other characters on Game of Thrones. It even went unnoticed by many people watching the show. But a deleted scene between Pycelle and Tywin Lannister would have changed that dynamic enormously. Pycelle interrupts Tywin while he's fishing, and as usual, he's playing the fool in order to seem non-threatening and inept. Unimpressed by the charade, Tywin cuts off Pycelle's babbling.
Stop it. Am I the only one to see through this performance?
This certainly changes the dynamic between Pycelle and Tywin. It also suggests that most of the other people in King's Landing are comparably daft. The scene doesn't just make Tywin seem more formidable, it also changes how we see Pycelle. Now he seems like a dangerous and devious man, instead of a mild annoyance. In the second season of Game of Thrones, Daenerys learns an important lesson in trust after she's ferociously betrayed by her handmaiden, Doreah.
Khaleesi, please. You said you'd never leave Karth alive. Come.
Doreah meets a wholly unfortunate end, with Daenerys sealing her inside a vault to die, which is arguably kind of a harsh way to take somebody out. As it turns out, we didn't even see the worst of Doreah's actions. In a deleted scene from Season 2, she gleefully strangles Daenerys' handmaiden Irri to death. Of course, that scene effectively turns Doreah into a far more insidious character, and it makes her betrayal seem so much worse than what we ever saw on screen. The White Walkers were always a major threat in Game of Thrones, but it was also a major challenge to get the people of Westeros to believe the threat was real. Jon Snow spent an enormous chunk of screen time arguing about the Walkers, though few people were ever willing to take his warnings or Bran's visions to heart.
A crippled boy claims to have seen dead men on the march beyond the wall, thanks to the magical help of a raven with 3 eyes.
Yes, it is a bit much.
But in a deleted Season 2 scene that we never got to see, it's revealed that Tywin Lannister took the White Walkers quite seriously from early on. After hearing stories of corpses with blue eyes on their bone-white masters, Tywin discusses sending an envoy to Mance Rayder, and then the King Beyond the Wall. This plot development would have seriously changed our perception of Tywin, and it would have considerably raised the stakes for the Lannisters as a whole. Had the scene aired, we would have seen the first major house start preparing for battle with the White Walkers far ahead of time, while pretty much everyone else was too busy being skeptical. Renly's death was a linchpin of several plot threads: Melisandre's dark and complex magic, the Tyrell's insatiable thirst for power, and the War of the Five Kings. Renly had the charm and charisma that Stannis lacked. He had the backing of a large and fruitful house, and brilliant women like Marjorie at his side. At this point, it's all too easy to forget what a genuine threat he was. But above and beyond that, Renly was Loras's lover, and the deleted scene from Season 2 illustrates their love with a tenderness that's rather unusual for the world of Game of Thrones. In the scene, Loras laments his inability to stop Renly's murder, confiding in his sister Marjorie that he feels somewhat responsible for his lover's death. Marjorie urges Loras to turn his attention to their family.
We have to think of our house now. The whole country's at war.
This scene makes the Tyrell's emotional stakes all the more clear. It's easy to see Marjorie as conniving above all else, but this unusually touching moment illustrates that she still very much loves her brother. Olenna Tyrell was one of the most fearsome characters in Game of Thrones. A brilliant strategist, a cynical plotter, and a devoted grandmother, she was a woman who'd do anything to protect her family and their interests. Case in point, her murder of Joffrey Baratheon at his wedding. In a deleted scene from Season 6, she discusses the Lannisters with her son, Mace Tyrell. After Mace has made Cersei's Master of Coin, he's evidently unable to see how he's being manipulated. But Olenna sees exactly what's going on, and she's determined to keep Loras and Marjorie as safe as possible.
Cersei Lannister sent you to Bravos to get you out of her way. And she sent the bloody King's Guard to make certain you stayed there.
The scene brings to light exactly how close Cersei's plan came to ending in failure, and how enormously the Tyrells would go on to lose in Season 7, and thus how powerful Cersei truly is by the last season of the series. Though forces were arrayed on both the Tyrell and Lannister sides, it all came down to a game of wits between the Queen of Westeros and the Queen of Thorns. The direwolves have always been more than pets. Their fates have foreshadowed and influenced the fates of the Stark children from the very beginning. From Lady's death and Sansa's subsequent suffering, to Grey Wind's mutilation and Robb's murder at the Red Wedding. In a deleted scene from Season 7, Jon gives Ghost an important task before he sets off to meet Daenerys: keep Sansa safe. Ghost is essentially the only Stark direwolf left. Yes, there's still Nymeria, but that's a story for another day. The fact that Jon entrusted this job to Ghost is a sign of just how deeply he cares for Sansa. It also emphasizes how important Sansa, Arya, Jon, and Bran are to each other. Their strong alliance has survived that of the Lannisters, the Tyrells, and the Targaryens. Ghost is a part of Jon, or at least he used to be, before the King in the North up and ditched him in Season 8. You really do know nothing, Jon Snow.
Scenes can be cut out of movies for any number of reasons. Sometimes they grind the plot to a halt, while other times they clash with the tone of the rest of the movie. Often, they're just totally unnecessary. These deleted scenes, however, are some of the greatest ever filmed, which makes it even more of a shame that they ended up on the cutting room floor. Arguably the most important and horrifying scene in Andy Muschietti's adaptation of It is the debut of Pennywise, Stephen King's unforgettable eater of worlds. Spawning 1,000 memes and 1,000 more nightmares, the moment when Pennywise lures Georgie Denborough into the sewers below Derry is as terrifying as it is instantly memorable, and it's hard to imagine the situation could have played out differently. But it turns out that Muschietti actually directed a surprise alternate opening for It, which ends in a very different way.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.
While this was obviously filmed as a gag, Muschietti's alternate opening does provoke some interesting thoughts about the story. If Georgie had survived Pennywise's attack, it's entirely possible that the evil demon's reign over the town of Derry would have continued unchallenged. After all, the murder of Georgie was the beginning of the end of his demise, even if he didn't know it at the time. When we first meet Steve Rogers in The Avengers, he's taking out his frustration and despair on a punching bag as memories of his life during World War II flash through his mind. But there's also an entire deleted sequence which demonstrates just how depressed Cap has really become. The scene opens with Steve alone in his apartment watching World War II propaganda films. After poring through the government files of his long-gone friends, he briefly considers calling his old flame Peggy Carter, but never picks up the phone. Steve then wanders through a city filled with cell phones and fancy cars, completely lost in the 21st century, before winding up at a cafe.
Ask for her number, you moron.
He then takes a lonely subway ride to the boxing gym where we meet him in the actual film. It's a shame the sequence was cut from the movie since it shows the full extent of Steve's isolation and makes it a more satisfying victory when he finally finds his place in the world. Marvel movie dads are often rotten, and Thanos has got to be the worst of the bunch. Even his favorite daughter Gamora has suffered a fair bit of abuse at his hands. But while the relationship is incredibly twisted, the two still feel some affection for each other, and Infinity War did a good job of exploring their complex dynamic in a short amount of time. However, there's one deleted scene that digs even deeper into their relationship. It opens in Thanos' throne room, with the Mad Titan showing his imprisoned daughter a scene from their past, back when she was his most trusted assassin.
By the look of it, you seemed content enough at the time.
But Gamora explains that her self-loathing only started to disappear when she joined up with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Even a guilt trip from Thanos isn't enough to get her back on side.
You had a family here, little one. You just didn't care what happened to it.
While the scene isn't exactly necessary to the story, it does give some color to one of the movie's most fascinating relationships. A deleted scene doesn't need to be long to be great. Take this moment from Spider-Man 2, for example. The scene comes after Peter Parker has given up on his crime-fighting career and is ready to finally live a normal life, having thrown his suit into a garbage can. Eventually, the suit makes its way to J. Jonah Jameson. The Daily Bugle's cantankerous editor is thrilled that Spider-Man has called it quits, but in this deleted scene, we learn that maybe there's a reason why Jameson dislikes Spidey so much. Even though this scene is incredibly brief, it's a hysterical moment that suggests Jameson might be a bigger Spider-Man fan than he cares to admit. The weightlifting sequence is one of the best moments from M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable.
How much is it, Dad?
About 350 pounds.
It's a triumphant moment for the self-doubting David, but in one deleted scene, he gets an extra bit of reassurance that he's really something special. After impressing his kid, David goes to visit the weight room at the football stadium where he works and successfully lifts nearly 500 pounds. It's a nice comic sting to close the scene, although as Shyamalan himself pointed out, it was just a bit redundant coming straight after the basement sequence. But that doesn't mean it's not a lot of fun. Hannibal Lecter is a stone-cold psychopath. He's a genuine monster who feeds on others both emotionally and literally. But while serial killers aren't usually big on feelings, there's a deleted scene from The Silence of the Lambs that shows Hannibal is actually capable of empathy. Locked away in his underworld prison, Hannibal launches into a monologue about the psychology behind his fellow killer, Buffalo Bill.
How Billy wasn't born a killer, Clarice. Oh no, he was made one through years of systematic abuse.
Tellingly, Hannibal isn't speaking in his usual condescending tone. You can actually hear the sympathy in his voice.
Billy's houses will be very small, with tiny windows, no flowers, no pets, no toys, no sun.
He ends his impassioned speech with a line that is both chilling and strangely sad.
How Billy wants to be reborn, Clarice. And he will be reborn.
Only segments of Hannibal's speech are heard in the movie's theatrical cut, but had the original scene remained intact, it might have offered audiences a deeper look into Bill's twisted mind and a better understanding of Hannibal Lecter himself. Captain Quint has got to be one of the greatest movie characters of all time. Played by the inimitable Robert Shaw, Quint is a salty sea dog who loves beer, hates sharks, and has fun antagonizing wealthy college boys. It soon becomes clear that there's a lot more going on beneath Quint's strange exterior, but early in the film he's played as a cackling coot with a bizarre sense of humor. One deleted scene from Jaws demonstrates just how odd Quint can be. Requiring some fishing line that's strong enough to catch sharks, he drops by the local music store to buy some piano wire. There, he finds a young boy practicing the clarinet and starts to sing along. Granted, the scene doesn't really contribute much to the film and would have done some damage to the story's pacing, but it's a hilarious performance from Shaw and a welcome chance to spend some more time with Quint. One of the defining character traits of Lethal Weapon's Martin Riggs is his unflinching willingness to put himself in harm's way. This is a guy who's always hoping that somebody will end his lonely life, and his desire for death is made all the clearer in this deleted scene, where Riggs squares off against a schoolyard sniper. Riggs gets a call that there's a gunman firing at a school, and the SWAT team isn't going to show up anytime soon. Naturally, he makes his move.
Riggs! Get out! You're in the line of fire! Get down! What are you, crazy?
When he finally reaches the sniper, he doesn't hold back. Yeah, it's not entirely necessary to the plot, but don't pretend it's not badass. Few deleted scenes have captured the hearts of movie lovers quite like the Jitterbug musical number that was cut from The Wizard of Oz. Clocking in at 6 whole minutes, the dance sequence took 5 weeks to rehearse and perform, costing MGM a total of $80,000. Reports suggest that the scene was ultimately cut to reduce the film's running time, but it's also possible that the upbeat nature of the song simply didn't fit with the story's darker elements. Written by composer Harold Arlen and lyricist E.Y. Harburg, the scene was based around a pink and blue insect that caused its victims to dance uncontrollably once bitten. Although the jitterbug wasn't included in the movie's theatrical cut, hints towards its existence still remain.
I've sent a little insect on ahead to take the fight out of them.
It just goes to show some things can't be disposed of so easily.
A deleted scene from the Elvis biopic features none other than one of country's biggest movie stars. Well, sort of. Here's how an early cut of the film nearly paired the king with one of country's most lasting talents. The critically acclaimed biopic Elvis provides an intimate glimpse into the legendary performer's life. Its dynamic approach to Presley is supported by Austin Butler's striking portrayal of the performer, which helped him win a Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actor in a Motion Picture Drama. The project's bold visuals and a lively soundtrack give it a rhythmic quality worthy of Presley's legacy. Credit for this vibrant blend goes to Elvis director Baz Luhrmann. His previous work has a style all its own, bringing together inspired choices from the realms of art, film, pop culture, literature, and music. For Elvis, the director once again came up with a soundtrack that utilizes top talents from today and the performer's signature songs. New contributions from Doja Cat and Eminem alongside Presley's most famous songs. It also remixes some of the singer's catalog for dramatic effect. Luhrmann's use of music to amplify a moment or emotion is on full display throughout the movie. Still, the director regrets losing out on one song. The track's placement in a crucial scene, along with the meaning behind it, tips its hat to a beloved musical icon. One of the final scenes of Elvis is a heartbreaking look at the artist's then harrowing life. Sitting alone with ex-wife Priscilla Presley, Elvis worries that people will forget him.
40. And nobody's gonna remember me.
It's a portrait of a singer facing an uncertain future as the world he knew collapses. For the filmmaker, this moment shows how Elvis and his first wife remained on good terms after their split, but it also amounts to a death scene. Luhrmann told Variety, "I always wanted another moment where Priscilla came back into his life and that they were friends. In a way, when he walks on that plane and it takes off, we don't need to see him die. He's dead." The interview also gave Luhrmann a chance to speak on Elvis saying, "I will always love you," to Priscilla before he boards the plane. The backstory relates to a missed opportunity between music royalty, namely Presley and Dolly Parton. In the film, Elvis was set to sing the famous song to Priscilla in those quiet moments in the car. Luhrmann made the decision to do away with the brief moment, but not before acknowledging why the scene didn't make the cut. The director explained to Variety, "We just didn't know how we would fit it into the schedule. You can't drive the car because of gasoline, so it's my guy Fletch pulling the car with a piece of rope. There's no plane and no tarmac, just a wind machine and the actors." In real life, Elvis Presley planned to perform Dolly Parton's legendary song, "I Will Always Love You," but it seems once again that his longtime manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had the final say. The problem was a disturbing one for songwriter Parton, who was allegedly asked to give up half her publishing rights by Parker. Parton told W in a 2021 interview, "I wanted to hear Elvis sing it, and it broke my heart. I cried all night, but I had to keep that copyright in my pocket. You have to take care of your business." Parton went on to explain that Elvis did actually sing "I Will Always Love You" to Priscilla when the two of them divorced, a gesture which she says touched her. And while she had to wait until 1992 before the song became a huge hit on the Billboard pop charts, courtesy of the late Whitney Houston, she remains proud of its lasting legacy. Parton told W, "They also played the song at Whitney Houston's funeral. After that, I thought, I bet they'll play the same song when I go."
When it comes to genres, horror is one of the hardest to get right. The smallest detail can break the spell filmmakers rely on to suck viewers in and get them invested in the scenes that'll fuel nightmares later. It's all about timing and balance, so it's no surprise a lot of otherwise good scenes can get the axe. Sometimes those lost scenes are awesome. Whether they give new insight into a character or hint at a sequel, they're worth revisiting. Let's do exactly that, starting with a killer confrontation. The Saw series started out pretty basic. Two guys, leg chains, hacksaws, you know the drill. Things would eventually get more complicated, but we could usually count on Amanda staying relatively strong, up to her violent end at least. As a victim-turned-willing accomplice, she needed to be a little more complicated than most of the other characters, who were of course usually just torture meat. Making the jump to becoming Jigsaw's pawn is almost unimaginable, and this deleted scene from Saw 3 is a glimpse into that struggle.
Very rock star. Sorry, your hair. It's very rock star.
It's too bad we never got to see it, because it's particularly effective in a series that could have benefited from some relatable moments like this. It's a flashback to an Adam who's oblivious to what's in store for him, and a chance meeting that's about to go horribly wrong. We all know it, even if they don't.
I'll see you there.
Henry's Bad Day. It was one of the most terrifying movies of 2017. Pennywise gave everyone another reason to fear clowns. But that wasn't all for the Losers Club, who also had classroom bully Henry Bowers to deal with. They know Henry's a little unstable, and we know it too. One blink and you'd miss a deleted scene would have helped make the full extent of his psychotic break completely clear. Henry sits in a car watching our favorite group of losers head into the most terrifying house we've ever seen. Yes, even including this one. He has company, but friends Belch and Victor aren't feeling too talkative, considering what he's done to them. And that just really brings it home about just what kind of bully the Losers Club has had to deal with on a daily basis. That's the very definition of horror. Say what you will about Pennywise, but at least Henry makes your own school bully look positively pleasant. Evil Dead's extra dark details. The 2013 reboot of Evil Dead was as ridiculously bloody as you'd expect, and director Fede Alvarez once told Collider, "I know we ordered a truck of blood the other day that was 50,000 gallons just for one scene. That's a shocking amount of blood." Even though most made it on screen for an insanely blood-soaked finale, there were still a few details left on the cutting room floor. In the original ending, Mia's brother Steve burns down the cabin. It's a sacrificial move as he traps himself and their possessed friend. A deleted shot shows a little more of what happens inside the cabin as it's going up in flames. And spoiler alert, it's not good for Steve. And in case you've ever wondered just what happens when the blood stops flowing and the bodies are done falling, this cut scene shows just how Mia got back to civilization.
Are you okay, kiddo?
Help me.
Neither shot adds anything to the story, but it's possible that last glimpse of Steve might have been setting up a sequel. We hope. groovy. A breathless confession. 2016's Don't Breathe might be one of the most tense, claustrophobic thrillers ever made, and it starts when three thieves decide to break into the home of a blind man. It's not long before they realize they've picked the wrong house, and it's Stephen Lang's performance as the intended victim that's at the heart of the film. Since he doesn't have much dialogue, it's extra terrifying when he does speak, like he does in this deleted scene.
My daughter was my life.
And that might be why this ended up on the cutting room floor. It might have given him just too much to say, going into some pretty explicit and heartbreaking detail about the accident that killed his daughter. While it might help us understand more about him, the explanation is ultimately unnecessary. The scene would have thrown a wrench into the film's pacing, but Lang's reading of it is no less mesmerizing than the rest of his performance. Extra scares. Most deleted scenes are short and sweet, but 2002's The Ring lost an entire subplot involving an accused murderer played by Chris Cooper, who shot scenes to bookend the film. While these scenes unfortunately were never made available to the public, a few other deleted scenes have slipped out. One of the most nerve-wracking is an incredibly creepy one in which Noah makes a horrifying discovery as he heads off to investigate the classic sort of creepy cabin. Unfortunately for him, a small boat floating just offshore in the lake grabs his attention.
Hey, buddy! Hey! You okay?
It's effective, but maybe too effective. The ultimately unnecessary scene and subplot may have had the effect of lessening similar scares at earlier and later points in the film, and we can all agree, The Ring is pretty epic without the added weight.
Given A Nightmare on Elm Street's immense popularity and its status in the modern horror film canon, you would think there would be very few facts or secrets about the 1984 horror classic left to discover. But thanks to an obscure deleted scene, you would be oh so wrong. A scrapped scene from the film has recently resurfaced online, and it completely changes everything we thought we knew about the burnt-up serial killer Freddy Krueger and his most well-known would-be victim, 15-year-old Nancy Thompson. The sequence, first included in the 1996 Laserdisc release of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and only included sporadically in later home video releases, is an extended version of the conversation Nancy and her mother Marge have in the original cut of the film. Marge takes Nancy down to their basement and explains to her that Krueger was a filthy child murderer who was freed on a legal technicality. Marge says that she and the other parents of Springwood, Ohio, tracked Krueger down and discovered him hiding in a boiler room where he used to take his young victims. The parents then doused the place in gasoline and lit it up in an attempt to get rid of Krueger for good, a strategy echoed by Nancy at the end of the film. In the theatrical version of A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy's mother assures her that Krueger can't get to her, and that he's dead because she's killed him. Marge then pulls out one of Krueger's razor gloves to prove that he's gone and that Nancy can rest easy. But in this alternate scene, there's additional exposition between the moment Marge admits to burning Krueger alive and when she unwraps the killer's famous weapon. Nancy's mother discloses the real motivation behind murdering Krueger. She and her fellow neighborhood parents wanted revenge after Krueger had already killed some of their own children. That's right, Nancy and her friends all had siblings Krueger had already murdered.
You too, Nancy. You weren't always an only child.
With those few sentences from her mom, Nancy realizes that Krueger isn't just some random deranged man with supernatural abilities and a desire to kill children and teenagers. He isn't even just a killer who seeks vengeance after getting burned alive all those years ago. No, he's a murderer who took away a piece of Nancy's family, who left her parents bereft and her without a sibling, and who also did the same to her closest friends and their families.
They all had a brother or sister once.
As such, this reveals to alter the entire dynamic between Nancy and Krueger and instills in the teen a new reason to go after the monster. Though the deleted scene has been readily available to watch online for years now, there's a chance plenty of Nightmare on Elm Street fans haven't seen it yet, which is huge considering how drastically it could change their thinking of both the original 1984 film and the film series as a whole. If Craven had kept this version of the storytelling session in the theatrical version of A Nightmare on Elm Street, it potentially could have had a domino effect on the events of every franchise installment thereafter. Each new series entry picks up and expands on what came before it. So if the official Nightmare lore included the fact that Nancy had a sibling who was killed, that could have been used to explain her re-emergence in 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors. It definitely would have provided her with even more motivation to put Krueger down in the classic original Nightmare. As if slipping a supernatural phone tongue wasn't enough.
So's okay now. You can sleep.
There's a layer to The Office even the most die-hard fans may be oblivious to: the many hours of deleted scenes that never made it to primetime. Some episodes have so many that they nearly constitute separate episodes unto themselves, and many are just as funny as the jokes we still quote endlessly. It's hard to forget Michael, fresh off his trip to a Jamaican resort, banging on a steel drum and serenading his employees with the news that he's feeling
hot. That's all I know so far, but I'm going to keep practicing.
It's good.
He has no idea that he isn't introducing his colleagues to island living, but preventing them from doing their work. And simultaneously no idea that the sunbathing photo of Jan is about to blow up his office. In this deleted scene, he's almost sweet in his sincerity. Michael sounds ridiculous as he attempts to remember the lyrics to Harry Belafonte's Deo, and no, he's nowhere near pulling off this vibe. He describes wanting every day to feel like it did for him in Jamaica, when he woke with the sunrise, ate a mango, and looked forward to hours spent with someone he loved. Michael has no idea how silly he looks, how messy things are about to get with Jan and his job, or how much he's going to annoy his employees. He's just happy to be enjoying his newfound sense of vacation identity. Ryan's descent from good-natured temp to sleazy, pretentious grifter was one of The Office's most satisfying character arcs. It's not that he was ever diabolical, just deeply and unrelentingly smug. Even at the depths of his low points, from sporting bleached hair in a bowling alley to being driven to work by his mom, he never lost his grip on his own unearned sense of superiority. Audiences love to hate Ryan because the world is so full of Ryans. He tried on being a hipster photographer, the world's laziest startup mastermind, and even the dad dumping his baby on a stranger to follow an unendingly codependent relationship. This deleted scene gives the viewer a bit of insight into how Ryan rationalizes being Ryan. As he explains to Kevin, someone else does everything bad he's ever perpetrated, and that guy is always and forever the old Ryan. He's Ryan 2.0 now, and now still has to bear the weight of another man's misdeeds. Why should he be punished when the sins of this other man already press down upon him each day? It's utterly obnoxious and makes total sense. Plus, it makes the moment when Kevin pulls the same trick on him all the more sweet. Jim and Michael's relationship took many forms. Like when Jim confided in his bumbling boss about his feelings for Pam, it was a genuine friendship. Other times, it became a game of Jim seeing just how much he could get away with under the nose of his boss. Once in a while, it grew openly adversarial. But it never stopped mattering from the moment they were introduced to the day Michael left for Colorado. This deleted scene from Local Ad is an example of the kindness that was always the foundation of Jim and Michael's camaraderie. Yes, Jim is pulling a fast one on Michael, culminating in Michael's surrender of his own office. Michael is made to look silly in contrast to Jim's knowing prankster charm. But Jim is genuinely helping his friend get into the right headspace. And by the end of the episode, he arranges a special screening of the Michael Scott director's cut at Poor Richard's Pub. When Michael needs a suit to play off, Jim steps in to provide. Michael, meanwhile, gives him a creative outlet in his workday. Perhaps The Office's greatest trick was its casting of real-life rock star Creed Bratton as a fictionalized version of himself. Bratton's performance never entirely strayed from the truth of his origins. The former musician was in the 1960s band The Grassroots and ended up playing a bizarre alternate universe interpretation of himself in The Office. The character was a flower child through and through, from the mung beans he sprouted on a damp paper towel in his desk drawer to his fake ID machine. He sometimes forgot to do his job, but he'd find a way to cover. In this deleted scene, Creed behaved as he never had before, competently. We get to watch the man who once toured with the likes of Janis Joplin and The Doors rock out on a Pennsylvania party boat, playing the electric guitar like he was born to it.
Now I do quality assurance for a paper company. As you can imagine, drugs played a part.
Had this been included, it would have been the only acknowledgement of the history of the actor/character prior to the finale, in which he finally plays an acoustic song. The lateness of that reveal is a lot of fun to watch, but the deleted scene shows the Dunder Mifflin crew completely baffled at their colleague's skill. He might not be able to last more than 90 seconds on a phone call, but he can play like he never left Woodstock. The fake fire that led to Stanley's heart attack has become legendary on The Office. It was a great opening scene, from the escalation of Dwight's cigarette in a trash can to the moment Angela's cat falls out of the ceiling. But social media has given the clip new life, circulating everywhere from Tumblr to Twitter. Stanley collapsing is just the cherry on top of a strange comedy sundae.
I'm gonna give him mouth-to-mouth.
No, don't give him mouth-to-mouth for this.
You're gonna swallow his tongue. Open your mouth!
Michael!
Don't swallow it! I'm fine! Leave me alone!
In the deleted scene, Michael buys a portable defibrillator, and you're fairly certain he won't actually electrocute someone, but The Office has never been a show afraid to hurt its characters. After all, someone already had a heart attack, and there was that episode all about Michael hitting Meredith with his car. But the funny comes from Michael getting into it with his arch-nemesis in The Office, Toby. By the time Michael makes his way to the annex and asks for a handshake from his greatest enemy, you're nearly convinced that Michael might just send a second employee to the hospital. Lucky for Toby, the prank is obvious, and Michael doesn't succeed. But for a moment, the audience is perfectly suspended between horror and hilarity. Who could have imagined that Phyllis, with her love of gaudy makeovers, charming handicrafts, and overwhelming perfume, would have ended up so truly bizarre? Her marriage went from being a lovely facet of the Office part to the most sexual relationship on the show. She took revenge on Angela for crimes committed in the name of party planning. And hey, remember that time she revealed that she gave up a child for adoption and wondered if Aaron might be that very baby? Phyllis's depths were strange, funny, and often pretty endearing. But in one deleted scene, things take a turn for the wildly morbid. Phyllis straight up confesses to manslaughter that she and Bob only narrowly got away with, a crime she isn't even able to convince herself into dismissing. It's humor so dark that it makes sense that it was cut. But as a deleted scene cast into the quasi-canon of the show, it's truly horrifically hilarious. Before Andy was in and out of love with Aaron, before he was the boss, he was a fumbling salesman with nothing but a Cornell degree to his name. Among the earliest hits he would take was the moment he realized the young woman he'd been seeing was, in fact, an underage high schooler. The Office pulled a bit more comedy from the otherwise criminal situation in this deleted scene. Andy cartoonishly confronts his girlfriend, Jim attempts to keep Andy from incriminating himself, and it becomes more and more clear just how thoroughly she and her friends were using him for access to the adult world. Cutting this scene made the plotline more focused on Andy's failure to establish himself in Scranton, and made it less cringeworthy. Sometimes comedy comes from the stuff you don't see. It makes sense that we don't get to see much of Michael splashing around in the titular koi pond of this 6th season episode, especially when much of the story hinges on exactly how he fell in. But a deleted scene, which shows the security camera footage of the fall and its aftermath, reveals the whole affair as a showcase of comedy greatness. Carell shows off his slapstick chops to an extent rarely seen in the show, somehow managing to drag the event into an operatic odyssey. He repeatedly underestimates how far the edge of the pond is as he slips and stumbles. The fish are bewildered and, as we learn later in the episode, endangered by Michael's pratfalls.
Michael, the custodian called again. Apparently a koi has died.
It's a fish.
And through it all, the security camera sweeps calmly back and forth. There's just something perfectly absurd about it and reminds us of just how good physical comedy can be. Jim and Dwight's rivalry was a pillar of The Office from beginning to end. What made their tension so special was the fact that Dwight never stopped believing himself to be the superior man, despite the many, many times Jim took him down a peg. Dwight is, according to himself, the true authority in The Office, an alpha male, a genius, and so entirely perfect at being himself that his Second Life virtual persona just happened to also be a Pennsylvania paper salesman who owned and operated a small-scale beet farm. It's Dwight's ego which makes this deleted scene so special. Dwight's password is Frodo, because of course it is, and then he changes it to Gollum, because of course he does. A lesser show might have reduced Jim to a bully and Dwight to the kicked-around patsy, but the cast and crew of The Office knew that Dwight would never allow himself to be reduced to such a cringing caricature. He's the volunteer sheriff and would never show any kind of weakness around his rival. But the audience roots for both of them because no one's really getting hurt, and Dwight and Jim need each other to get through their days at Dunder Mifflin. In this deleted opening scene, Dwight is faced with the greatest dilemma of his life. When authority is compromised, who should he obey? He walks in to find his entire desk circled in police tape, wondering what happened. His first instinct is to look at Jim, who is the obvious prankster. On the one hand, Dwight believes himself to be the greatest of all leaders, evidenced most dramatically by the time in which he was manager. He became something of a dictator, commissioning portraits of himself for the conference room and painting his office as black as possible to intimidate the employees that he, of course, only ever refers to as subordinates. And yet Dwight is just as defined by his servility. He never loses a chance to play assistant to Michael and all who fill the managerial role after him, even if it comes at the cost of his dignity. To Dwight, there is no dignity without hierarchy. Essentially, he becomes a robot faced with a paradox. We often saw Dwight reduced to ridiculousness, but rarely did we ever get to see him play a part in it himself. Season 4 starts off strong, and not just because Jim and Pam finally decide to act on their feelings. That long-running plotline plays second fiddle to the real star of the season opener, the moment Michael hits Meredith with his car. The entire show came from that moment, poised on the edge between horrifying and hysterical that The Office kept sharpened to a wicked point. It became a TV legend. What could ever top Michael Scott's Dunder Mifflin Scranton Meredith Palmer Memorial Celebrity Rabies Awareness Pro-Am Fun Run Race for the Cure? The deleted scene of everyone visiting Meredith in the hospital comes about as close as anything could. It's a symphony of awkwardness, a perfect blend of these characters at their most vivid. Angela's bad attitude and Kevin's blunt narcissism are held barely in check by Michael, who, of course, is working overtime to convince everyone that he is not at fault here. The scene is everything that made these characters so weird, lovable, and ultimately unforgettable. They might not have wiped out rabies, but they cemented a place in our hearts. Most film productions shoot far more footage than we ever see, and the stuff we do get to see on the big screen is usually there for a pretty good reason. But when the final edits are made, some deleted scenes are sorely missed from the movies they were cut from. They might add extra layers to the characters and their stories, provide humorous breaks in dramatic action, or even give the audience a fascinating new perspective on the plot itself. But these are not those scenes. No, these cinematic mistakes were better off left on the cutting room floor. A dark turn. The Back to the Future movies were never supposed to be anything but crackerjack, wholesome family fun, so it's easy to see why this particular scene in Part 3 ended up in the trash. Early on in the movie, Buford Tannen's gang face off with the local marshal and his young son. After disarming the marshal, Tannen orders him to leave town. He does, but Tannen shoots him in the back anyway, right in front of the boy.
Remember that word, son. Discipline.
While this might have been in keeping with Tannen's ruthless, detestable character, it would have been a shocking departure from the trilogy's lighthearted tone. Ant-Man wins big. Scott Lang's desire to turn away from crime and become a suitable role model for his young daughter Cassie was one of Ant-Man's principal character arcs, so it's no surprise then that this scene didn't make the cut. It featured Scott's buddies Kurt, Luis, and Dave indulging in a night out at a casino, consistently getting lucky with the help of a certain diminutive hero. It's an entertaining sequence, but given Scott's steadfast insistence on turning over a new leaf, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense in the context of the movie. Hadley's Lost Hope. In James Cameron's 1986 masterpiece Aliens, Sigourney Weaver's Ellen Ripley returns to the moon LV-426 to make contact with a lost human colony. Accompanied by a ragtag band of space marines, Ripley finds the colony deserted and half destroyed, resulting in some of the Alien saga's darkest and most unsettling scenes.
Nothing. Not a goddamn thing.
The movie's original cut, however, included another scene which single-handedly put an end to all the tension and terror of the abandoned Hadley's Hope. Here, we meet the inhabitants of the colony as they go about their day, complete with lengthy, unnecessary static shots and a walk-and-talk conversation between two characters which adds almost zero substance to the plot. We also meet Newt and her family before the scene concludes with the movie's first appearance of a facehugger. All in all, it amounts to an arduous, useless bout of exposition which would have drained pretty much all of the suspense from the movie's terrifying second act. Judgment Revoked. The ending to Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the perfect coda to a grim, thrilling sci-fi adventure. The audience's point of view traverses a dark, mysterious road while a weary Sarah Connor muses on the ambiguity of the future, before allowing herself a brief, final glimmer of hope for humanity's fate. James Cameron's original ending, however, was a little less ambiguous. We see an elderly Sarah sitting in a park while an adult John Connor plays with his daughter. Sarah states flatly into a tape recorder that Judgment Day has been and gone.
August 29th, 1997 came and went. Nothing much happened. Michael Jackson turned 40.
She then makes a few comments on humanity's future, which you might recognize from the final cut. Fade to black, roll credits. It's far too tidy an ending and totally unsuitable for the movie it's supposed to wrap up. Then again, it wouldn't have left much room for a sequel either, which may not have been the worst thing in the world. A grievous error. The showdown between Obi-Wan Kenobi and his wheezing alien nemesis General Grievous was one of Revenge of the Sith's most entertaining sequences. According to a discarded animatic for the scene, however, the fight almost ended in the most ridiculous way possible. The scene would have played out largely the same, right up to the moment that Kenobi manages to partially pry open Grievous's protective chest plate. Rather than getting cold-cocked and nearly falling to his death, Kenobi would have finished Grievous off by tearing out his heart with his bare hands, casually tossing it aside and blasting it with his sidearm. Somehow managing to be both way too dark and cartoonish at the same time, the very fact that this scene was cut from the movie is quantifiable proof that George Lucas is sometimes capable of discarding bad ideas. Not quite getting out. At the climax of Jordan Peele's masterpiece Get Out, protagonist Chris Washington finally escapes the grip of the nefarious Armitage family. As he barely restrains himself from strangling Rose, his ex-girlfriend and pursuer, a police car arrives. Knowing nobody could possibly believe his story, Chris prepares to be arrested, or worse, but it's a fake-out. The car is driven by Chris's TSA buddy Rod, who helps Chris make good his escape. In the movie's original ending, however, it really is the police who arrive, and Chris is promptly arrested and taken to jail.
I'm good. I stopped it, you know? I stopped it.
Although it might have made for a more realistic conclusion to the plot, Peele's decision to give the beleaguered Chris a happy ending seems like it was for the best. Clerks' Last Shot. Kevin Smith's 1994 debut feature is a largely plot-free film which found most of its comedic mileage in the reference-laden dialogue of its slacker leads. It's a slight, sardonic work in which almost nothing happens, which would have made its alternate ending not only shocking, but completely inappropriate. In the original ending, Dante is closing up the store after Randall leaves. A man approaches the counter and Dante informs him that they're closed, only to be shot dead on the spot. As the man cleans out the register, the movie ends with a close-up on Dante's lifeless body. Smith claimed that he shot this ending simply because he had no idea how to end the movie, but fortunately, star Brian O'Halloran, who hated the sequence, was able to convince him to cut it. Thank goodness, or the film might not have become the cult classic it is today.